Hi there, I'm Tom Riordan, and welcome to episode 5 of the Cookieless Present by SugarFree. Our goal for this show is to share honest conversations with advertising and marketing industry experts who are living through a changing digital identity landscape. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Sean Sweeney. Sean is someone who's held leadership roles at Coegi and Media Math. He's a fellow Chicagoan and musician, and over the past 2+ years, he's been helping growth advertisers through his venture First Position Digital. Sean, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Before we get started, why don't you walk us through your background a little bit and how you spent your career prior to founding First Position Digital?
Sure. Well, it's been I'm a little long in the tooth in digital, so I've been doing this about 23 years. I have sort of a unique skill set. In those 23 years, I've spent it on three different sides of the marketplace. So I started with on the brand side, working for and representing brands like eBay, Apartments.com, and Cars.com, and then I also got into the ad tech side of the market, working with Datomi initially, and then Rubicon, and then Media Math on the DSP sides. And then I moved on to an agency in the Midwest that kind of taught me how the agencies work as well. So I kind of had this unique perspective from three different sides of the market. And over that time, I really just started to enjoy working with brands and learning about their business and trying to figure out, and solve the problem of how do you drive their outcomes that they're looking for through paid digital. And so that's what I really learned about myself, is that I enjoy helping, address that and solve that problem with the brands. And so First Position Digital came about, it was during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I'm sure for you too, it's like, a lot of people just kind of rethought their career path and what they wanted to do. And, I don't think I've ever thought I was going to start an agency, but I always wanted to start a business, and I always wanted to work with brands mainly directly. And so First Position Digital came about to kind of fulfill that desire that I had to work with brands directly. But I also work with creative agencies as well that need a partner they can rely on for paid digital. So what First Position Digital does is we work with brands mainly, but also creative agencies that need help kind of and guidance through paid digital marketing, and they need expert strategies and successful business outcomes through their paid digital channels, whether it's search, whether it's paid social, or whether it's programmatic, which we offer solutions for. So, I haven't looked back since doing it. It's, as an entrepreneur, as you know, Tom, it's always up and down, but I'll never look back. It's been one of the most rewarding things I've done so far. So I've kind of taken all that experience, put it into this company, and working with some brands that we're helping kind of deliver their business outcomes for. So that's how it
Well,
came.
that's excellent. Congrats on your first couple of years of success. Is there an advertiser segment that you tend to target specifically, or that you feel like you're best suited for?
Yeah, it's in the past I've worked with a lot of big brands like the Targets of the world, Allstate, State Farm, Meyer, Ally Bank, Callaway Golf, and I've gained a lot of experience working with those brands and understanding what they really need and want. And you know, while I am not suited to manage those and to handle the needs of those big brands, because they're very complex and they need a lot of support. I think big agencies can kind of manage that for them. Where my sweet spot is, I feel, is helping those middle market brands, the brands that have 10 million to a billion in revenue. And there's a lot of them out there. I would argue there's more of them than there are the Fortune 500 that really need help navigating paid digital, because it's difficult. It's we the promise of paid digital was supposed to be that it was going to become more efficient, and it hasn't. As you know, it's become more complex, probably by design, right? Keep some people in business, but at the end of the day, I feel like the value that we can provide is more suitable for middle market brands that really need that help and that navigation, and we can support them through that journey. So especially now with all these privacy issues coming up and the changes that the major platforms are making almost by month, it seems like these days. I think that's our sweet spot, and where we can really help is these middle market brands. And we started out trying to be vertical focused. I was really honing in on CPGs and QSRs at the time, but it quickly moved out of that because, frankly, the referrals I received, especially when I first started up, the first several clients were not those in those industries at all. So, but it really, I feel pretty strongly that the solutions that we can apply can really apply across any vertical, right? It's just understanding. It takes understanding what the business is trying to achieve, learning about the business as well, right? Learning how their business works and try to get as much knowledge as you can about their business, and then taking that and coming up with a digital program, and that includes what channels, what technology, what measurements, strategy we're going to utilize to be able to measure all of this. And really, it really is those three pieces that you can take and apply it to almost any vertical out there. So I think that's where we feel our strong suit is being able to do that and adapt to really any vertical brand that needs that help.
Makes total sense. And it's a time of tremendous change. So there's certainly an appetite for that thought leadership to help guide brands through this period. So I'll use that as a transition to go ahead and get into some of the questions for today. Starting as a consumer rather than an advertising expert, in a given week, do you think about privacy? What's kind of your general orientation? Are you someone who's happy to share your information with entities that request it? Do you keep your PII guarded and close to the chest? How much of an issue is this for you as a person? And then we'll talk about how it's kind of bled into your day job or not.
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger in my 20s, I didn't care. I really didn't care. I mean, you have to think of my time frame. I'm a Gen Xer, so when I started in this business in '99, the internet was just proliferating and permeating into a lot of different aspects of our life. Like I remember when there was a bank called Wintrust Bank. I think it was the first online only bank ever. And I remember when it came out, and I was so bullish on the internet at the time that I was like, I just got to dive into it, like full body and just jump into this. So when and at the time, like signing up with a online bank with all your personal information was kind of, in fact, stupid, to think about. When people are like, why are you signing up with an online bank? I'm like, I don't know. I want to see how it works. Like, I want to see if it's more efficient. It says I could save money. And so in my younger days, I really didn't care. Now, the tools that are out there now are much different than the tools back then. So it was easy for folks like me back then to be able to be like, it's not a big deal. Now, especially being a dad, I think now I've become a little bit more concerned. I always joke with my daughter, like, man, you wish you would have grown up in the 80s and 90s because you didn't have these issues with like leaving a trail behind digitally. When you look at things like, the proliferation of AI and things like ChatGTP that are coming out and using data that is already out there to come up with solutions or answers, I am starting to get concerned. I mean, the long-term effects of having our path out there, things like your Google Maps, like it's kind of creepy to me that Google sends me once a month an email saying, here's everywhere you've been in the last month. It's like, I don't remember signing up for that. I mean, I shut that off after I got that. But so I think nowadays I'm definitely a little bit more skeptical, which is tough because we work in this industry where the only way this works is if we can understand it. That's the only way this works well is if we can understand the most about you without knowing that you're Tom or that I'm Sean, right? So I think, I think our industry has done a really poor job in that whole value exchange and explaining that whole value exchange to the consumer over the years that like, look, in order for us to give you free internet and free visits to these websites that you love, we need to know a little bit more about you to be able to then sell advertising to offset that cost, right? The server costs and everything else. We've just done it. I feel like we've done a poor job as an industry and not addressing that or, coming up with some sort of talk track to talk to the consumer and say, look, we're not focused on you, Tom. We're focused on you, male in your 30s, living in Chicago, who likes music, right? So because of that, I think, Apple kind of took it to another level with the iPhone and kind of made it a product feature to kind of, scare people into like, oh my gosh, I don't want this anymore. So we lost the high ground on that discussion. And so I think that along with some of these AI advancements that are coming out and that will continue to come out over the next few years is really going to freak some people out. Me probably too as well, even though I'm very much open to, hey, I'll share it with brands that I trust, right? Because I want a personalized experience from the brands that I like. But the brands I don't like, I don't want them to have that data. And so there's no controls yet that I know of that are easy to use from the consumer standpoint to be able to shut off and turn on each of those possibilities. And so,
Hmm. But you're saying that had we better explained the value exchange as an industry over a longer time period and not gotten to a point right now where many consumers feel caught off guard that their data is for sale, maybe we could have earned more goodwill and people wouldn't be so freaked out right now.
yeah, I don't think it would have stopped the proliferation of AI and the tools that are being developed now. I just think that, for example, like Google has probably the most data in the world on everybody, right? And they're going to come out with, or they're coming out with, their version of ChatGTP for search. I mean, they can use that tool, that data in a lot of different ways. They already do, right? So, I mean, I think that because we didn't groom the consumer to understand like how we're using this data, I think now that these tools look and feel a little bit scarier to people, we're getting thrown into that mix as well. Like, oh, this advertising is bad using this data. And, while at the federal level, the laws have not reached us yet, it's still out there and it could. But things like CCPA and, now Colorado's adopting it and Utah and Virginia just adopted the CCPA or version of it. It's kind of forcing our hand a little bit and putting us in a bad light, I feel like. And so, that's one of the things that I'm regretful of as an industry is that we never really had that direct conversation with the consumer about the value exchange that's happening when you visit a website. And so, so I think, in my personal life, I've kind of evolved on this whole thing. Initially, I was like, who cares? I don't have anything that people can worry about, But I think things like TikTok and, some of the surveillance that's going on there, coupled with how Facebook uses data, Google uses data, and let's face it, that's where most of the budgets go anyway these days. Still about 50%, I think, right now. I think we're leaving it in other people's hands, and at some point, I think we're going to have to put it back in the consumer's hands, even more so than just saying allow, not allow, right? It's going to have to be a little bit more of a controlled technology that we as the consumer own. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that will help the industry as well and hopefully get us back into a positive light versus what I feel like right now is a negative consumer sentiment about us, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And I tend to align that on a personal level. I've gotten a lot of use out of giving my data to tech companies, and I feel comfortable in many instances doing it. But as an advertising practitioner and someone who's spent time getting their hands dirty with large data sets, you're just a few phone calls away from really incredible PII resolution and all the things that you've heard about are true, right? And what you can do with personal data is true. There's just a tremendous responsibility for those who have access to it and for how they're going to use it.
Yeah, and a good example too to think about is like Instagram. Like I have bought several things off of Instagram that have been algorithm to me because it's relevant to me, right? Now, but the flip side of that coin is many people still believe that like Facebook's listening to all your conversations. That's a direct violation of their privacy, right? And so these are the things that we kind of have to shine a light on as an industry, and we should. And those things need to be kind of hashed out and made more transparent to the consumer, right? Because that doesn't help us, right? We're the ones selling those ads, for brands on behalf of brands. We're the ones managing that for brands. And it's just putting us all in a bad light, and we're just not addressing it in a way that we're playing defense versus offense is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, with a perception issue largely. Yeah. So moving away from the perception and going into your day job, do you think we really do run campaigns differently today than we did a few years ago? There's been massive changes to how consumers are visible on the internet, but we also usually talk about the subsequent changes that are going to come. The Chrome finally getting rid of the cookie in the future, maybe more privacy coming to Android.
Yeah.
Where do you sit today when you're advising customers on how to run campaigns? Does it feel like you're still able to get a lot of value of kind of the traditional digital targeting, or do you see that identity loss is impacting your recommendations and how you run campaigns already today?
Well, I think the fact that the addressable audience has shrunk, I think now it's, there's different numbers out there. I've seen anywhere from 30 to 50% now is addressable on digital. So right there, your pool has gone from this to this, right? So that's impacted everything. I think what I've seen is, especially from these middle market brands, they're kind of running back to their safety net, which is Google and Facebook, right? And they seemingly are going deeper on Google specifically, which is funny because Google, like I said, Google these days is acting very weird, at least to agencies like us, where they're sending me like 3 different reps to try to call on us and try to get us to spend more money through these brands. They know exactly, they have access to see what the brands are doing, and because we're managing the platforms and then every month it seems like they're coming up with a new thing like, all right, we're changing this in 3 months, right? We're changing this in 3 months. GA is going to change now to GA4, and this is what you're going to lose in tracking. So, I mean, it's all happening really fast. And so, we're keeping up with as an agency because we have to. I can imagine the brands, are probably struggling a little bit more than we are. So I think that's affecting everything right now, all those constant changes that are happening. And I think it's because Google and maybe Facebook too Facebook's doing something similar where they're sending out these changes, like once a quarter now. And it feels like they're all preparing for what they feel is going to happen, which is potentially a federal law that comes down the pike. I don't know if that'll ever happen given our stalemate in Congress these days, but I think that I think it's already affecting how marketers are trying to deal with this. Now, does it? It's still frustrating to see that like Google and Facebook get and when you throw in Amazon, you're talking like 60% of every marketing budget for digital is going towards those 3 platforms. So, and I'm seeing that at least on the middle market level that they are investing more in those kind of home base platforms that they're more familiar with, and testing is a little bit more difficult to get out of brands to try to test new things. CTV kind of breaks that mode a little bit because I think everybody wants to try to run CTV, test it, and see how it's doing. But for the most part, like to get them to do audio and some other, digital out of home has become a little bit more difficult. So I think these days, everything has to lead back to trackable performance. But as that's measurement's going to become a real big issue once Google decides to switch off the cookies in Chrome, and it's already an issue I think right now. Measurement, but these things are impacting things today for sure. And I think that the brands that don't stay on top of it or have a partner that can help them stay on top of it and help them navigate those waters are really going to be left behind, especially the middle market brands, because there are not solutions out there that I've seen that can really be affordable and do the same things that these big brands can do with things like like CDPs and data clean rooms and aligning that with identity resolution solutions, right? Like those 3 things together are very expensive and take a lot of time and level of effort for brands to manage and to work through. And so, middle market brands don't have that kind of capital to invest in that. And so, what I'm seeking out is to try to help with some of this is like, what's a really good CDP that can help with identity resolution, but that's affordable for some of these middle market brands. My biggest concern going into when Chrome does shut off the cookies is, okay, so what happens to these middle market brands? I mean, I know the brands like the big brands are going to be fine. Like P&G talks about it, they already think they figured it out. Pritchard's talking about how he's figured it out already. Great. He saved a lot of money. Great. But he has a lot of money to be able to figure it out, right? Like these middle market brands that, they don't have these kind of budgets to figure this out. So my concern is how does that trickle down to those middle market brands and how do they respond to it? And, I'm still seeking out some of those solutions that are reliable, that can really scale for some of those brands. So it's definitely, things are being impacted now. And I think looking towards the future a little bit, these are things that have to be figured out as an industry to address the issues that I think are going to be coming, especially to those middle market brands.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting hearing the different perspective from middle market brands. I think the consolidation into some of the bigger platforms is a trend that's continued. It's not always the same giant platforms these days as it was a decade ago. You mentioned Amazon starting to get a bigger piece of the pie, but that certainly seems like one bet is to just make to buy familiar faces. Nobody ever got fired for buying Google. But the other point you make, I think, is a really interesting one, that middle market brands have less of an opportunity to use first-party data. First-party data is, of course, one of the major solutions being touted for third-party cookie loss, is that you can just move to a first-party model. And at Adobe, we spent a ton of time consulting with advertisers on how to build their stores with first party data, but saw the same issue you did, which is for smaller and more mid market brands. It's just hard. It's a big lift. It's an organizational change that requires a lot of change management, a lot of assistance, and just isn't easy today. So
yeah, and there's DSPs out there that can help with that, right? Like, we use Basis. Basis has a great solution for first party data to utilize. They're partnered with LiveRamp. It's a pretty seamless process. The issue is, from the brand's perspective, they want to own the data, not Basis, right? So they want to have it in house. They want to control the CDP aspect of that, right, for their own uses. And I understand that. So it's, I've yet to see that independent solution that is scalable enough, in terms of scaling down to meet a middle market brand's need, as well as capital requirement, to be able to operate efficiently for them and make sense for them financially. And so I'm still searching for that, and I think and other solutions like identity resolution and how to have an affordable solution for that as well. But it's a challenge for sure, and I think I'm hopeful that technology will come along to be able to address that. Maybe there is some stuff out there that I'm just not aware of.
Sean, there's sales reps who listen to this podcast, so check your DMs afterward and let me know what you hear.
I know I probably set myself up there, but it's true though. I mean, it is a need in the market, and I think it's something that if someone can come up with a good solution. I mean, there is a partner in Detroit I've talked to that has a pretty decent solution. I'm not sure if it's scalable or not, but because it's untested. But I think there are some solutions out there, but they're just not getting out into the hands, I think, of these middle markets yet. And maybe they are, and I don't see it. But
either way, your point that it's complicated. There's a few pieces to it: creating the data, owning the data, having the rights, deploying it, and using it. Right? There's a lot to it.
The other thing to think about too is these middle market brands don't have the legal team to address this issue as well. Like, Pritchard has probably a slew of legal eagles that he can work with to craft their policies and make sure that they're using their data in a privacy responsible manner. These smaller brands just don't have that. So so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves as part of this privacy and cookieless world for digital advertising and how that's addressed.
So going forward a couple of years, do you think that's the same conversation we're having? How do we use first party data? What are some alternatives, or what are some like big changes that you think we might see over the next few years as it relates to this topic?
It's a good question. I think measurement's going to be a mess. I think nobody's really figured out measurement. You can go, you can look at the media mix model. You can look at test versus control. You can do all kinds of things, but I think either my hope is that we'll be used to non-perfect information informing how to move forward with a digital strategy, right? I think it's going to put agencies like mine in a really tough spot in the next few years, all these changes, because we're going to have imperfect data to optimize to. And therefore the brands will have imperfect data to intake and make decisions against to move their business forward. And so I think that's down the road, that's going to be a challenge, is kind of navigating and helping them understand that, like, look, it's not just us underperforming. It's really, we're just doing the best we can with the signals that we're getting from Google and Facebook and all these different platforms, which are now going to be a little bit more less granular and more general. And so
at that point, Sean, you might be working with the Google DSP or the ad exchange, formerly known as AdX, or these different components. Do you think we'll continue to see a breakup of some of these tech partners? I think you'd mentioned a few conversations ago, Facebook being someone you felt like could potentially be in the crosshairs of regulators. Do you think we're dealing with less of these consolidated super players and more of the individual pieces in the future?
We'll see. I mean, it seems like the government is pretty hell bent on going after Google right now and trying to break it up like AT&T style back in the 80s. I am less convinced that that's going to happen to Facebook, only because, iOS 14 from Apple really screwed Facebook. They really made a huge impact to their business in terms of how they can then target those Apple users on their platform. And you can hear Zuckerberg talking about it in the quarterlies. Like, he would flat out talk about it and say how it impacted the business. Now they're still making billions a quarter, but in advertising. But at the end of the day, it did have an impact. And so I'm not necessarily convinced they're going to go after Facebook. I mean, they brought him in how many times to talk through it, and so it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I think Amazon will continue to grow as a option for media buyers like myself. I'm interested in seeing what happens to the DSPs, because I can envision in the next several years the DSPs having less value down the road, especially if the AI proliferates the way I think it might. To where there'll be brands that'll try just do an automated AI buying directly themselves, right? Someone will come up with that solution, and if it's a good enough bot, if it's a good enough program that could get by with decent results, and save on a fee from a DSP, I could see that potentially being the case, and then plugging into the supply chain directly through this new technology. So I don't know, like, that's kind of what I look at down the road, probably 5-6 years down the road. Is that going to be prolific now, where we're going to use AI primarily as the decisioning engine and optimization engine, and everybody else is going to have to plug into that, which will force the hand of the publishers a little bit, and then it kind of puts the DSPs on the outside. I think that could be something down the road that could happen. I hope not, in some ways, but because I would be affected by that, of course. But I think it's inevitable that some sort of AI solution is going to try to come out and say, hey, you don't need DSPs anymore. We can plug in directly with the publishers and do it all automatically, and you're not paying us a big fee.
Well, I think as technology has shown us the jobs then of the future, the media trader will no longer be the one running campaigns and setting bids, but they'll be managing the AI that is running campaigns and setting bids, right? Like, the AI still needs a keeper, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that it's a good argument to make. Whether the technology works or not, we'll see, right? I still think you need humans to guide and to provide insight, right? Data can only tell you so much. You got to be able to interpret the data properly. And I think that's where experts come into play, and really people who have worked across different channels on digital and work with brands on strategies in the past and understand the business that you're in. I think we still have value there, right? But I do think there'll be some, especially some big brands. Like, I could see like a P&G trying that with one of their brands, because what do they have to lose? And like, talking about it at ANA and telling how great it is. But I don't necessarily think it's gonna be throughout the industry, but I think it'll capture some market share if that technology comes to exist in 5 years, which I think it will. I think someone's going to try it and see if they can kind of cut out every part of that process, at least as much as possible. But, see if they can cut it out. So,
well, I like this idea that during this period of data loss, signal loss, changes in technology, advertisers are going to need to lean on trusted agents on their behalf, and go with their gut, and go with have faith in their partners in a way that we didn't before. It'll be much more difficult to be data driven during this next little period where we're seeing so much change than it was in the past, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And data driven is not going to be just a throw around term that everybody uses. It's going to be real, and it's going to be, if you're not data driven, you're going to lose big time to your competitors. So what'll be interesting over time is, like, how does the full funnel strategy evolve? Does that go away? Does that continue to make sense for a lot of brands? I mean, I very much subscribe to brands really operating, at least in digital, operating a full funnel strategy. I've always believed that. I've seen the results of that be very successful. Not every brand can do it, right? Some just have to get the bottom line quickly, and I understand that. But I'm curious to see how this may impact that feeling and that holistic approach down the road. Will technology kind of nullify that, or will we always need to do upper funnel, brand awareness and whatnot? I mean, if you're going to have less data to be able to target certain people, I can't see where that goes away. Right.
Maybe a Super Bowl ad becomes more valuable, because that's the impact of that is more obvious than other more data driven tactics.
Well, I got to think that, I mean, I know it's we've talked about this as an industry for a while, but I have to think at some point that CTV and linear TV are going to merge down the road, and just be one, addressable channel, mass audience channel, regardless of how they're ingesting that content. I do feel that that's going to merge at some point. Maybe it's 5 years down the road, but I think that'll become easier for brands to manage as well. And I think audio, we'll see if audio continues its rise in terms of brands trying to test it out. Digital out of home, same thing. I think those are the future. I think display ads are gonna they've already kind of gone down. Although it's funny, I keep reading this research that comes out from like Ad Exchanger where it's like display is still the number one bought type of creative and channel, so to speak, on programmatic, which makes me laugh because it's like, really, we're still just doing display ads. So it's interesting.
It's a good business for a lot of people. Any last words, Sean? We're coming up on time. Any last words you want to leave our audience with before we wrap today?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, if you are one of those middle market brands, start having the conversation with the C-suite now about how these changes coming about in privacy are really going to affect your business, and they will. From the digital marketing perspective, you got to think about, you got to start talking to CDP partners. You got to start talking to identity resolution partners potentially, and really start investigating, the agency partners that you want to work with that have this experience and the technology and the resources to be able to assist you in that journey, because it's going to be a big impact, especially when Google finally shuts down the cookies in Chrome, which I guess is still going to be Q4 2014. I guess is still what they're looking at.
I think so. Yep.
Well, that's what they say. Who knows? We'll see. But I think it's going to be. You really need to start laying the groundwork now and start testing with different metrics that you're not necessarily comfortable with testing with right now, to see the difference in performance that you can expect when things are not going to be addressable down the road. And I think the sooner you have those conversations and the sooner you start collecting your first party data as much as possible, the better off you're going to be when Chrome, which is still, I think, the most utilized browser, will shut down that access, and it'll be an impact. So start thinking about it, start talking to the C-suite, come up with a plan, start capturing your first party data, and start talking to the vendors and agencies that you can trust and learn which ones you can trust to help you through that journey.
You heard them, advertisers. Time to get on it. So thank you, Sean. Really appreciate you joining me. Thank you, everyone who tuned in to listen. If you want to hear more conversations like this, you can find all our past episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music. I'll continue to post fresh conversations every few weeks. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye.